Hello and welcome back to the Beefy Tech channel. Today we'll be taking a look at the 7900XTX plus 7950X3D plus Hynix A-die RAM running at 6200MHz with fully tuned timings. In the top left hand side you've got all of the games that we're going to be testing today as a little preview, and yes, I will be going in the order that they're currently in. But before we start with the games, I did want to show you exactly how my CPU, GPU and RAM are set up. Right here, you've got my RAM timings. As you can see, I'm basically running the 1-to-1, which is the memory clock at 3100, U clock at 3100, and fabric clock at 2067. My particular CPU cannot do better than this, and at 6400 or higher than 2066 on the FCLK, it simply is unstable no matter what I try. Or occasionally it is stable slightly higher, but you start seeing performance regression. The Hynix A-die is at CL28 with full custom timings, and you can see the timings right here if you want to copy them for yourself for your Hynix A-die kit. Remember, these timings will not work for M-die. With that said, right here you've got the undervolt of the CPU, which is currently at -23, 25, 26, 27, 10, 26, 25, 16, and as you may have noticed, I did not touch my second CCD. Why? Because it made nearly no difference in most of the games that I've already tested. I have actually attempted to run -10 flat or -15 flat on it, but it was mostly, quite frankly, pointless because I don't do anything that could benefit from the second CCD being undervolted, so I just honestly haven't bothered to reapply the undervolt on it from when I last did my BIOS. Anyway, let me quickly walk you through the GPU too. One very important thing regarding my GPU is that I'm still running 23.5.2, which is a slightly older driver from AMD. I found it to be the most stable of the bunch, and while the 23.8.1 might be stable, I haven't personally tested it as it's a very new driver and I've been away. So I'm gonna stay with the driver that I know is good and I know runs well, and I'll do the test like that. I'll be honest with you though, if everything works as intended, the driver should not actually impact anything because I'm not testing any ultra brand new games that would require a driver update. Keep in mind, whenever you're seeing these numbers, I have tuned these mostly for Call of Duty as it's the main game I play, but they work pretty much universally. And the reason it works universally is because of my minimum and maximum frequency. As you may have noticed, the minimum frequency is at 1200, which is very low, and that is done purposefully so the GPU can essentially find a sweet spot of where it's comfortable with frequency in games that won't work just like Warzone, either more intensive or less intensive. A lot of people like to separate these by only 100 MHz, but if you do that, you will not have all game stability, you'll have stability only in the game that you tuned that frequency for, so keep that in mind. My maximum is 3200, which is fairly reasonable for a 7900XTX. I've got custom fan tuning over here on the right, which is just a generic ass curve. My undervolt is at 1092. That was accidental, it was supposed to be 1090, but it's the absolute maximum my GPU can do in terms of an undervolt, with my VRAM timings at 2720 and fast timing enabled with the power tuning maxed out. Alright, starting off with Rainbow Six Siege, these are the settings that I'll be using for the test, and the testing will be done at 1440p. As you can see over here, I'm playing 270Hz, 1440p, VSync off with no FPS limit, and 90 field of view. Alright, let's get going, and upon first look, we are 100% GPU bound at roughly 500 FPS. But obviously, this won't be the case across the entire map, even in a game like Siege. And not only that, this map is quite a small map in comparison to some of the others, so it's probably a best case scenario in terms of performance, especially on this game, but we'll see how it holds up. Okay, and we have jumped into the benchmark. I'm not gonna make you sit through all of it as you've probably seen it before, but I do want to say the performance is yet again quite good. CPU is running a bit hot in this game, but nothing too unusual for a 7950X3D. And the GPU is still locked at exactly 100% with the averages hovering around 530, 540 at the moment. And we are at the end of the benchmark, my bad I didn't mean to go down, scoring a lovely 499 average, fully GPU bound. Overall, perfectly good results. Moving on to Warzone 2/Modern Warfare 2, I do already have the benchmark results for Modern Warfare 2 at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, so we'll go through those first, and then we'll jump into a match of Al Mazrah and a match of Ashika real quick and see how both of the maps perform. Starting off with the Modern Warfare 2 benchmark results though, Right here, we've got the 1080p results of the 7950X3D and 7900XTX, scoring and achieved the 486 and a CPU average of 504 with a GPU average of 517. Take the results as you will. Moving on to 1440p, we score a 402 average on the achieved results, 497 CPU average, and 410 GPU average. Mind you, this is slightly lower than my all-time best of 407 achieved results, but it's still a perfectly good result, and I took it today, so it's more accurate. Right here, we've got the 4K results at 447 for the CPU and 261 for the GPU. 4K results aren't anything to be impressed by, given the 4090 I think can actually do a bit better at 4K, but they're still perfectly reasonable. As per all the games, I'm gonna quickly scroll through all of my settings, specifically so you can see what we're working with. It is important to note, sorry, I was testing the 4K results, I gotta put this back, that all of these are optimized specifically for the most FPS you can absolutely get. So we're kind of sacrificing visuals, but that's what you do in a game like this. Anyway, I do run Fidelity Cast on 80, where is it? Right here, to essentially over-sharpen the game and make it look better despite the low settings. And do also keep in mind the video memory of 50 only works for video cards with 16 gigs of VRAM and above. With that said, the view is also set to 120 and all of these are set to wide, so it's just the settings any Warzone 2 player should be using. Now, just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to use Frame Chaser's results from a 13900K with DDR5 8000 and a 4090, and I'm going to compare them to the 7950X3D and 7900XTX. I don't mean to shit on Jufus, but he did go on the side of the map to test the FPS, which is very untrue of how you'll actually perform in game, but for the sake of testing, I'm going to go test his spot and then a spot that is more realistic for the performance you're going to be seeing, just so we can compare. So we're in the same spot that Frame Chasers was, and we're going to do a little bit of a run through here, specifically so we can see what the performance is like. I do want to mention this is side of the map FPS, and obviously that won't be fully accurate to what you're going to be seeing in game. The reason I decided to come exactly where he was to demonstrate that indeed, if you run on the side of the map, you can get some pretty bonkers FPS. Right here, I started the benchmark a bit early, but as you can see in this part, I'm even seeing upwards of 360 FPS while running on the side, which is absolutely incredible for this, and it's much higher than what he was demonstrating with a 13900K and 4090. So I hope this gives you guys a rough idea of what the difference is between a maxed out 13900K rig and a 7950X3D rig would be. Yes, a lot of it will come down to the GPU too, but the 4090 with an Al Mazrah has time and time again shown to be slightly faster than the 7900XTX, so this all comes down to the CPU. And the CPU in this scenario, being the 7950X3D, is indeed faster than the 13900K by quite a large margin. I am now in Al Mazrah City to show you guys real-world performance that you'll actually be experiencing in-game, not some off the side of the map shit. So right now we're getting roughly 280 something averages with 140 something lows. Lows not incredible, but they've never been for Al Mazrah to be honest, and half the time they're tied to the server anyway. Regardless, I'm doing this test specifically because I want you guys to understand that off the map shit is not actually real. You're not going to be getting that in-game. In-game, you're going to be seeing something more like this. And funnily enough, this does match the 13900K, while being in the middle of the city instead of off to the side of the map, which is honestly very, very solid results for the 7950X3D and 7900XTX. We are moving on to Warzone 1 Caldera, and the reason I wanted to test this game really badly is because it's always had an issue with AMD GPUs where it would stutter quite seriously, and last I tested on the 7900XTX, it was still stuttering unless I used the Rivatuner frame cap. Right now, when I was dropping in, I could already feel some stutters, and as you can see, the frame timeline isn't perfectly smooth. It's showing the occasional micro stutter. If we start the 1% lows, you can see they are pretty much horrific, showing that full AMD is still not the way to go for Warzone 1 Caldera, and it never was. But don't fret, there is actually a fix for this. If you use Rivatuner statistics, you can quickly tab out, set a frame cap, and fix your 1% lows, and I'm gonna do that just now. Alright, having switched back to the game, you can now see that the 1% lows have improved and the game is not stuttering nearly as much, or if at all. So, the Rivatuner fix still works for this, but you do have to cap your FPS. Moving on to Need for Speed Unbound, we'll be yet again testing at 1440p, but unlike the other games, we'll be testing at ultra settings. Let's see how this performs. Let me activate the 1% lows and go for a little drive around here, just so we can see if this GPU and CPU combo can keep this game smooth and running well. As you can see, it did actually have a stutter over there as I was driving through the city, but it could have been the 3D cache loading, and yet again another one. So it would seem that this CPU and GPU combo are not great for this game already, at least from what I could tell. I do wonder if that is as a result of the 3D cache loading whenever we get to a new area. We're going to find out as I'm going to keep driving around quite a little bit. The GPU currently is running pretty much maxed out, and the CPU is running quite hot, but managing fairly well. The clocks are quite low, but I think it's as a result of the CPU running so hot. This game does actually use a lot of RAM too, but it seems to have stabilized as I drove outwards of the city. So I'm going to drive back in the city because it seems to be more demanding. Wow, the GPU usage is locked at 100% and doing 460 plus watts, which is the absolute maximum of the GPU. All I can say is that this game is extremely demanding and a perfect way to test if your 7950X3D and 7900XTX are running well. We did only see those two small stutters while we were driving through the city, so we're going to try to replicate that to see if maybe it was just a 3D cache loading the city. We have not experienced it again, and we're driving quite fast through the city, so it seems to have been indeed the 3D cache of the 7950X3D having the initial stutter upon loading the textures of the game. So that's good to know. We are within Forza Horizon 5 now. We're going to test at 1440p with unlocked refresh rate at custom graphics, but the only thing that's really different is that I set this to extreme and then turned off ray tracing specifically to give the 7900XTX a best case scenario in terms of performance on this game at extreme 1440p. And as you can see, we're in the middle of the night in a Shelby GT500 and we're going to do a bit of testing. I'm going to start the 1% lows and we're going to drive around a bit and see how it holds up in this game. I did actually drive around like a minute before this specifically because I wanted to, see if everything's working properly, and it is. Luckily, and this game performs superb. At 250 average FPS, I could say that I am more than happy with the performance, and the 1% lows are more than reasonable, especially for a car game. You can probably even enable ray tracing and still see amazing performance on this game. It is actually looking spectacular currently, even at these settings, which are not actually maxed out for Forza Horizon, but they're fairly close to maxed out. With that said, I'm happy with the performance, and this is definitely what you want to see in all the other games too. Alright, we're here within Battlebit. I'm honestly not gonna even bother to show you the settings because they're unironically just set to Ultra and it's Battlebit, so it doesn't particularly matter anyway. This is a 127 player versus 127 player match, so basically the most players you can have in a match within Battlebit. I'm going to be running around specifically to fully test the performance, but as you can tell, this is a fairly light game on the GPU given we're only at 70% usage and we're hitting 400 plus FPS. Now I'm getting my cheeks blasted here, but it is what it is. This game does hold its performance out incredibly well. It is CPU bound because there are 250 plus players on this map, but that's perfectly understandable given we're at such high frame rates with so many players. Overall though, given the frame timeline is so smooth and everything runs so well, I'd have no complaints about this game. It's a Battlebit. It is made to run on a potato PC, and on a high-end PC of this sort, it runs absolutely flawlessly at basically any refresh rate you would need it to run, plus or minus the 500Hz monitors, which it wouldn't quite reach, but you could indeed find ways to make it reach that amount of frame rate. On the 4090, I was actually seeing a bit higher FPS despite still being CPU bound, so I don't know, take it as you may, but this game does perform extremely well. As we move on to Battlefield 2042, remember to like and subscribe if you are actually enjoying today's video and if it's helpful to you. With that said, let's go and check the settings of this game before we begin. I would actually like to try both ultra and low settings, specifically because I tried it on the 4090 also, and it's going to be good reference for me later on. And most people might actually be playing this game at low settings because let's be honest, it doesn't make that big of a difference to play low versus ultra in this game unless you're GPU bound. Which with the 4090 at low settings, we weren't GPU bound, but at high settings, we nearly were GPU bound. So this might be a different story given it's a 7900 XTX. Alright, and I can already tell you this is a far lower result than I was getting on the 4090, which was easily above 200 and something FPS, even at 1440p Ultra. In fact, I think it was around 230, 250. So way higher than the 7900 XTX can clearly achieve, as we're 100% GPU bound in this map specifically, which is in Conquest at Ultra settings. Alright, I'm going to lower the settings and we'll see how big of a difference the low settings make, as it might actually help with the GPU bound scenario we have currently. So I'm going to go over to options, and over here in display, we're just going to go to all low. Perfect. Now we're going to restart to the 1% lows. Okay, and this is a much better scenario for the 7900 XTX. It is now achieving way closer to what the 4090 achieved at low settings. What's interesting is that we might actually still have a GPU bound scenario despite being full low settings, but the FPS is good enough to where it doesn't particularly matter. I would say this is the ideal scenario, and this is how you'd probably want to play Battlefield if you were going to play on this setup. I got my stuff gapped, but regardless. 1% lows aren't spectacular. They were definitely also better on the 4090. Anyway, I'm just comparing to the 4090 now. Let's look at the results for what they are. The 7900 XTX can achieve 280 plus FPS average, and in parts like this of the map that aren't as busy, can even hit 300. So in my books, that is very good, especially for a game of this sort, where there's a lot of players on the map at once, with a lot of explosions and a lot of commotion. Okay, so before we continue, full transparency. I had to download Process Lasso and indeed enable the manual forcing of affinity, which is just forcing specific cores on games, because PUBG was stuttering like crazy and I had no idea why. Turns out the core parking is not working properly in this game, and I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I enabled Lasso, tested it, and it was better. So for the remainder of the tests, PUBG, Sons of the Forest, and Phasmophobia, I'm going to use Lasso just because until I fix the core parking issue, which might even inquire that I reinstall Windows entirely, I need to use this to fix my problem. I do recommend, if you guys have any issues yourself with the 7950X3D, to just download Process Lasso and set cores 0 through 15 on your first CCD, so you can at least guarantee that your games are running on the correct cores and that they're not bleeding over into the second CCD, which is the frequency CCD. Let's get going with the remainder of the tests. And as we're about to land in PUBG, I did want to remind you that I'm actually running the game on DirectX 11, despite it also having a DirectX 11 Advanced and DirectX 12 option for the rendering system. Apparently, DirectX 11 is the most stable version, so I decided to use that for testing PUBG. Let's see how the performance holds up, and let's see if it is actually smooth now. And seemingly, it's okay. It did have a little bit of a spike there upon first landing, but let's see how it holds up. Let me start the 1% lows, actually. Okay, here we go. And the FPS is yet again lower than the 4090, but that's no surprise since the 7900 XTX only ever competed in Call of Duty with the 4090, but I'd say this is still really solid FPS at 1440p Ultra. Not to mention that the 1% lows are incredibly good on this setup, and it's full AMD. So honestly, if you're using Process Lasso along with this, you're having a mighty great time on PUBG. 1440p Ultra at 300 plus settings while 100% GPU bound. Let's switch over to some low settings and see how big of a difference that can make. I'm gonna hit apply. Oh no, wait, that's just the... Okay, wait, here we go. Apply. And then restart the 1% lows. And it didn't do that much, so it only helped by like 60 FPS basically. 60, 70 FPS, let's say. So yeah, the game looks significantly worse now. You'd need to use sharpening basically to play on this. And it's not that an important amount of an FPS gain given you're already above 300 FPS. But yeah, it's hovering 380 now, so even better actually. Alright, so we're here on Sons of the Forest. Let me quickly show you all the graphics we're working with. So we just got outright Ultra preset over here with motion blur disabled. Restart the 1% lows, and we're gonna go from here. I've heard this game has issues with AMD parts, but we're about to find out if that's the case. My suspicion is that if you keep running into new areas, loading the 3D cache may unironically cause a small stutter every time you load into a new area. I've seen that on YouTube, but we'll see if we can replicate the issue ourselves. For now, it seems perfectly stable, and at 1440p ultra settings, this is more than plenty FPS, and I would not complain at all if I was going to play the game at this frame rate. We're 100% GPU bound and currently holding about 2900 MHz on the GPU at absolutely maxed out wattage. So overall, I do have to say the performance is significantly better than I thought. No gigantic visible stutters, and it's pretty much good to go, no problem. So yeah, maybe I did just watch too many YouTube videos, but it would seem that the 7900XTX and 7950X3D perform really well in Sons of the Forest. The final game we will be testing today is close and dear to my heart. It's Phasmophobia, one of my favorite games of all time, and it is extremely fun to play with friends, so if you haven't played it before, I highly recommend you give it a try. It's sort of a horror game, but take it more like a strategy game and you're really gonna enjoy yourself. We're playing at 90 field of view and basically maxed out settings minus things that look really bad, so I'm leaving all of these completely on how they are because the game looks very good like that. And we're gonna jump in a very intensive map and we're gonna see how it performs. Just for those of you that do know, we're gonna be playing on Maple Lodge as it's very CPU intensive. Alrighty then, so we've got fog, which is great because that's some of the most intensive weather you can possibly get in this game. This game does have a bit of an issue with stuttering no matter the rig basically, but let's see how it holds. Ooh, that was a rough one right there, first loading into the map. And very rough one right here, first loading in the map again, let's see. Oh, okay. Let's activate 1% load. So basically when you first load in the map, 3D cache loads everything, and yeah, it's a bit rough to say the least. Let's see if it keeps happening when we do run around here. We had it happen again over there for a split second when we were walking, which did hit our 1% lows. It happened again, so if you do move across the map with this CPU and Phasmophobia, it does seem to not be perfectly smooth, but I do have to admit it's a bit weird because I remember being on the 4090 and this was not the case on the 4090. So I do have a suspicion this might actually not be the CPU, but rather the GPU that's at fault, given we're also nearly fully utilized on the GPU. Yeah, so this is definitely not a perfectly smooth experience. It's obviously playable, but definitely not a perfectly smooth experience. And on a 4090, you'd be seeing 100 more FPS with significantly smoother gameplay. I did test this just a couple weeks ago when before I switched the 7900XTX from the 4090, and it was definitely way smoother. So yeah, it's probably the 7900XTX causing those little hitches that we were seeing over there. Don't get me wrong, it's still perfectly playable, but not the high-end top-tier performance that we were experiencing just a moment ago in the other games. So, what's my final verdict on the 7900XTX, 7950X3D, and Hynix A-die at 6200? I think it's a great combo and you can definitely have some fun with it. Overall though, it is a bit inconsistent, so just beware of that. I do recommend Process Lasso still for the 7950X3D because I've had it set up with AMD intended for months, and while it worked most of the time, occasionally an issue like today would arise, and then you'd have to jump back to Process Lasso until you can do the entire setup process again to make the core parking work. The 7900XTX itself does have the occasional stuttering issue in the occasional game, so it's not a flawless experience by any means, but neither is it something that would absolutely ruin your experience on the games that have said issue. Most of them can be fixed with either FSR or with introducing a frame cap. So do keep that in mind if you wanted to buy a 7900XTX and a 7950X3D. Thank you guys for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next time. Peace.